If you search online for who skied down Everest, you'll get a list of names. Some of them are legends, some are controversial, and some, well, that depends on how you define the word down. Because here's the thing, skiing Everest isn't like skiing anywhere else. It's not a clean run from the summit to base camp. The mountain resists skis in ways that are hard to explain unless you understand what the terrain actually looks like up there. And once you do understand it, you start to realize why so many claims fall apart. So to understand who really skied Everest and who didn't, we first need to understand why Everest fights skis at all. Because once you do, one famous descent, the one most people think counts, starts to fall apart completely. Let's zoom in on the upper mountain. Right now, you're looking at the South Col route, the most common path to the summit. At first glance, it looks like it could be skiable. Long slopes, open terrain, but here's what doesn't show up in photos. Most of Everest's upper slopes aren't covered in soft snow. They're wind-scoured crust and sastrugi, hard, wavy ridges of snow that feel like concrete under your skis. In some sections, you hit blue ice, polished rock-hard glacial ice where your edges barely grip. A fall here isn't a tumble, it's a slide that doesn't stop. And then there are the rock bands. As you move down from the summit, the terrain breaks apart. You hit sections of exposed rock, sometimes vertical, sometimes angled, that you simply can't ski. You have to take your skis off, down climb, rappel, and then put them back on lower. Now, add in the fact that you're above 8,000 meters, the death zone. Your brain is oxygen starved, your reflexes are slower, and at that altitude, the air is so thin that even the act of breathing takes more energy than your leg muscles have left for turning. You're trying to make precise, technical turns on ice, in hurricane-force winds. And this is where Everest skiing stops being about skill and starts being about definitions. And once definitions enter the conversation, reputations are suddenly at risk. If you ski most of the way down but walk through sections, does that count? If you ski from the summit to Camp 4 but no further, is that skiing Everest? And if no one filmed it, how do we know it happened at all? The mountaineering community doesn't have official rules, but over time certain expectations have formed. Continuity matters, proof matters, and the amount of terrain you actually ski versus walk matters. Once those questions exist, even if they're unspoken, some names begin to fall apart. One of the earliest and most debated descents happened on the north side of the mountain. It was Hans Kammerlander's. In 1996, Kammerlander, an Italian mountaineer from South Tyrol, claimed to have skied from the summit of Everest. It made headlines, it was celebrated, but over time, the mountaineering community started asking questions. See, Kammerlander's descent wasn't continuous. Around 8,600 meters, he encountered a section of the north face where there simply wasn't enough snow coverage. He had to descend about 250 to 300 meters of vertical rock on foot before he could put his skis back on lower. And while he was honest about it, the claim of skiing Everest began to sound less clear. Now, does that mean he didn't ski? Not exactly. It means the claim remains disputed. It depends on how you define a descent and whether you believe a hybrid climb and ski counts as skiing Everest. And here's why Everest specifically demands proof in ways other mountains don't. At 8,000 meters, memory distorts. Exhaustion clouds judgment. Summit day confusion is common. Even honest climbers sometimes misremember what happened up there. Kammerlander's story is controversial, not because he lied, but because the mountain doesn't leave room for ambiguity. Either you have proof or you have doubt. And on Everest, doubt never really goes away. There's another name that appears on almost every list of Everest skiers, and this one is widely respected, Davo Karničar. In October of 2000, Karničar, a Slovenian ski mountaineer, descended from the summit of Everest all the way to base camp. South Col route, witnessed, documented. He's credited with the first continuous ski descent from summit to base camp. And the hallmark of his achievement was that he never took his skis off. He famously skied over the aluminum ladders in the Khumbu icefall, and depending on how you define ski, that's largely accepted as true. But here's the complication. Karničar used supplemental oxygen, and his descent, while physically demanding, wasn't pure in the way some purists imagine. Even critics agree this was one of the most physically demanding ski descents ever completed. Does that disqualify him? Not necessarily. It just means if Karničar counts, then the rules get blurry again. Because now the question isn't, did he ski Everest? It's, how much does oxygen assistance matter when we're judging these claims? Now let me tell you about someone who finished, but not the way she wanted to. Kit DesLauriers is one of the most accomplished ski mountaineers in the world. In 2006, she became the first person to ski the 7 summits, the highest peak on every continent. Denali, Aconcagua, Kilimanjaro, Vinson, Elbrus, Karstens, and yes, Everest. But when DesLauriers descended Everest in 2006, the mountain forced her to compromise. She summited, she skied, but the conditions were brutal. High winds, hard ice, exhaustion setting in, and at the Hillary Step, back then, a true vertical rock chimney before the 2015 earthquake changed it, she had to rappel down on a rope. She downclimbed, she rappelled, and then she put her skis back on lower. DesLauriers completed the descent to base camp. She claimed the 7 summits, but even she admits it wasn't a pure ski descent. And you know what? That honesty is why people respect her. Because here's what her story proves. Everest didn't care who she was. It didn't care about her resume. It didn't care that she'd skied the other 6 of the 7 summits. When the mountain demands compromise, even the best have to listen. Her story shows that finishing Everest, even imperfectly, can sometimes be the most honest outcome. But controversy and compromise don't mean Everest can't be skied cleanly. One rider proved that. His name was Marco Siffredi, a French snowboarder from Chamonix. And when he showed up at Everest Base Camp in 2001, he wasn't there to chase a record. He was there to ride a line. Siffredi came from the world of freeride snowboarding, big mountains, steep faces, natural terrain. He'd ridden some of the most technical descents in the Alps, but Everest was different. In May of 2001, Siffredi reached the summit and descended the Hornbein Couloir, a long, steep gully on the north side of the mountain. Now, there was another snowboarder on the mountain that season, Stefan Gatt. Gatt went down a few days earlier, but he took his board off for about 100 meters. Siffredi didn't. He rode the entire descent without unstrapping once. The descent was filmed, it was continuous, and it was witnessed by other climbers. This is the first widely accepted snowboard descent of Everest, and what made it legendary was that he never took his board off. He also did not use supplemental oxygen during the descent. No disputes, no gaps, just a young rider carving his way down one of the most famous faces in the world. But here's the thing. Siffredi didn't feel like he'd finished, because the Hornbein Couloir, as steep and dangerous as it is, wasn't the line he actually wanted. There was another line, a narrower one, a steeper one, and that unfinished feeling would bring him back to Everest one more time. This aerial view shows the north face of Everest, and right here, cutting down from just below the summit, is the Hornbein Couloir. It's named after Tom Hornbein, the American climber who used it during the first traverse of Everest in 1963, and from above, it looks perfect. A clean, direct fall line. Steep, yes, but continuous. But here's what the overhead shot doesn't show. From most angles at base camp, you can't even see the whole thing. The Hornbein is a hidden couloir, and it's significantly steeper than the Hornbein, averaging 45 to 55 degrees. This isn't a ski line. It's a commitment with no undo button. The Hornbein Couloir is a trap. It starts narrow, maybe 20 meters wide at the top. As you descend, it funnels even tighter. The walls close in, the angle steepens, and the snow conditions, totally unpredictable. Some years it's hard pack, other years it's loose, wind-loaded snow sitting on ice, the kind that can release suddenly with almost no margin for reaction. And then there's the exit. The couloir doesn't just end at a safe runout. It spits you out onto the north face, where the terrain fragments into rock bands, ice falls, and cliffs. If you lose control in the Hornbein, there's no stopping. This is the line that separates skiing Everest from surviving part of it. This is the holy grail of steep skiing on Everest, and Marco Siffredi knew it. In 2002, Siffredi returned to Everest. He wasn't riding the Hornbein, he was going for the Hornbein. On September 8th, after summiting, Siffredi started his descent. Other climbers saw him enter the couloir. They watched him disappear into the upper section. From that point on, no one saw him again, and then nothing. He never came out. Search teams were sent. Helicopters scanned the lower slopes, but no body was ever found. No equipment, no trace. We don't know if he fell. We don't know if he was caught in an avalanche. There's no footage, no witnesses below the upper couloir. What we do know is this: the Hornbein Couloir has still never been skied or ridden to the bottom. Marco Siffredi vanished into the Hornbein Couloir and never came back. Siffredi didn't fail. He showed where the real limit was. Fast forward to 2018. A Polish ski mountaineer named Andrzej Bargiel stood on the summit of K2, the second highest mountain in the world, and skied all the way to base camp. Continuous, verified, documented with a helmet camera. It was one of the most impressive descents in mountaineering history. So when Bargiel announced he was going to attempt Everest, people paid attention. In 2019, Bargiel arrived at Everest base camp. He acclimatized, he studied the route, he waited for the right conditions, and then he walked away. The Khumbu icefall had developed a massive hanging serac, unstable ice looming over the entire route. The risk was too high, the margin too thin. Bargiel, the man who skied K2, refused to ski Everest. He tried again in 2022, same preparation, same focus, and once again, the mountain said no. High winds, dangerous snow conditions, no safe window, and you know what? That decision is why people respect him. Because here's what Bargiel's story proves: Everest doesn't reward the hardest line. It rewards the line that lets you survive the entire descent. And sometimes, the most honest answer is, there is no line. So, who really skied Everest? Depending on how strict you are with the rules, Davo Karničar did in 2000 continuously with supplemental oxygen. Marco Siffredi did in 2001 on a snowboard down the Northern Couloir without supplemental oxygen and without ever unstrapping. Kid DesLauriers did in 2006 with technical sections rappelled. But the people who claim they skied Everest without continuous proof, the ones who walked through most sections or stopped halfway or can't show evidence, they skied part of Everest. And that's not the same thing. Here's the strange part though. The mountain hasn't changed. The terrain is exactly what it was in 2001. The Hornbein Couloir is still there. Narrow, steep, deadly, hidden from view. The rules haven't changed either. Continuous descent, verifiable proof, respect for the terrain. Only our definitions have. Because at some point, we stopped asking, did they ski Everest? And started asking, what does it mean to ski Everest in the first place? Maybe the question was never, who skied Everest? Maybe it was always, what Everest allows you to ski.